Welcome to Mana's Seal YouTube channel. The previous video link is on the description box or on the top right card. Volume 15, The Half-Elf Godkin. However, whether or not the village of Aju survived was, in these circumstances, not important. What they should be thinking about right now was, if there were no changing the fact that the Lord was heading for this village, what should they do? What would be the best move to make? If that was the case, fighting the Lord is suicide. There is no other way than to summon elementals and flee while they're buying us some time. You think that's something we can just do? There's no question we'll be attacked by that thing in the forest. More importantly, we can just give it all the stored meat and other food at once, and let it fill its belly. That's right. Ursi have a disposition similar to a bear's. They probably like honey, too. We'll smear it on the meat too and hand it. At that moment, a roar reverberated that seemed like it made the earth, the air, the forest, and the cores of their bodies tremble. They could no longer hide in the shadows of the trees. The slowly walking Ankylosaurus Lord was there. The breaths of the dark elves became quick and shallow. The minds of everyone in that place went blank. Whatever ideas that had just a moment ago were blown away. They could taste the difference in power with bodies, and they shriveled up. It wasn't as if that roar just now had a special effect that induced fear or other mental effects. This was just simply and fatally their reaction because the Dark Elves understood the difference in their positions as living things. In other words, it meant that the difference in strength was so big and to such an extent that the Dark Elves were merely powerless beings that would be trampled underfoot. This is bad. Nearly all the Dark Elves were convinced of the tragedy befalling them and were under the control of resignation. However, it was still too early to accept that. Move. It was a shout to scold and rouse himself. Move, you say. And just what the hell can we do? How the hell should I know? Agni replied to the female Dark Elf's shrieking question with a few brief words that hung heavy in the air like a machete. How the hell should you know? You're just lashing out. You can count, no. How's there any way that even I would understand or know anything about what to do in this kind of situation? Even so, we have to move. What can we do all huddled together like this? At least those ideas just now, or was its objective to also make them terrified? The Ursus Lord's pace was surprisingly slow. Its head was lowered trying to catch the scent of the Dark Elves from among the flowers that were planted around the village. For some reason, the word plotting suited that figure, and it gave an impression that it was truly miserable. Was it wounded? If not, was it sick or even being affected by some kind of poison? They jumped at those hopeful observations, but that was no doubt just a kind of escapism, while they were descending into a sort of extreme situation. Do we shoot it? There's no need to think about provoking its wrath, not anymore. It's certain that it's coming this way. Then we should make the first move, bows can reach it. Besides, everyone has probably prepared themselves for the worst. If I can draw its attention, and then move so that I can separate it from the village, hold on. There's also a more alternative way to do it. It's oil. When Agni muttered that, puzzled looks appeared on the rangers around him, for a moment, but they instantly grasped his intentions. That's it. We can douse it with oil and set it on fire using a fire elemental. It's got that huge body. It'll be difficult for it to avoid the oil. We'll summon water elementals at the same time to make sure the flames don't spread. There wasn't much oil in the village. It's not as if it was difficult to come by. Because its uses were limited, it was one of the goods they didn't purposefully store. Shouting, "I'll go," one of the Dark Elves ran off, heading for the center of the village. He probably intended to tell one of the druids that should be in the storehouse. It would be bad if they were converting all their magic power into food, without knowing about the current state of affairs. At that moment, the Ursus Lord's roar made the air tremble. The same one, from just before that, made them feel the overwhelming difference in power. But Dark Elves right now had resolved themselves, and would no longer be shaken. What is it doing? One of the Dark Elves shouted curiously. It wasn't just Agni, all the rangers. They held the same question. Because of the nature of Ankylosaurus, it should have immediately charged them, the moment they were seen, but there was no sign of that. It was as if it had no motivation. No, when it came to a lord, it probably had more alternative objectives. When they were examining the situation, this time the Ursus Lord stood up and roared. Making oneself look big and intimidating your opponent was an action that wild beasts often did. However, what they didn't understand was, why wasn't it attacking? Not being a mere beast, but a magical beast, the Ursus Lord was a fairly intelligent being. Even though it had visually confirmed that they were there and definitely weak, why was it threatening them, in spite of all that? First, did those repeated roars just a short while ago have some sort of meaning? Hey, maybe this is just hunting practice for its young. If that was what that odd behavior was, it was possible and Agnia also mentally agreed with whoever's voice it was that said it. The parent would bring the child along when it went on a hunt. The child would learn by observing the parents hunt and learn the skills for taking each type of prey. There were many examples where, if it didn't do this and left the nest without acquiring any hunting skills, it would die right away. The Ursus Lord's mysterious behavior might be trying to teach his child that was watching from somewhere about the food known as dark elves. If that's what this is, then considering the future, shouldn't we hammer it into the cub that dark elves are a tough quarry that can hurt you? It'll be a real pain if we're remembered as mere food. Won't the Lord go berserk if we kill its cub? If it's a child, it won't be tricked by meat with honey poured over it. If this is hunting practice, then it'll probably only eat live bait. But there's value in trying it right. Suddenly, the Ursus Lord twitched its nose and started running in the direction of the dark elves. That dejected appearance it had until a moment ago was already gone. Curiously, they couldn't feel a looming murderous intent. But there was something different. Agnia threw his gaze behind the Ursus Lord for only an instant. He got a sense that it had the characteristic behavior of a beast that was being driven. There's no way that could be the case. First, there shouldn't be any being that could drive an Ursus Lord. What the hell? I don't understand what's going on here. It wasn't just Agnia, many of his friends were also confused. They couldn't read what actions the Ankylosaurus Lord was going to take at all. It might have been a mistake to try and understand the magical beast that was the king of the forest, but this was the first foe their experience and intuition as rangers had been useless against so far. However, even with that confusing them, they crossed over one of the bridges and fell back. It was an undeniable fact that the Ursus Lord was running right at them. If they were even the slightest bit slow in taking action, they would become the Ursus Lord's prey. The Ursus Lord, who had now come to the base of the elf tree where no one remained, stood up. It was gigantic. A size that was more than enough to reach the height of the bridges. And it swung one of its massive arms. The attack violently shook the elf tree, and its trunk had been gouged out as if it had exploded. The bridges connecting the trees bent, and the dark elves desperately clung to the sides so as not to be thrown off. The outer circumference of an elf tree had been made especially strong. It was a specially made tree that had been raised by having its growth accelerated by using magic on it many times and giving it vast amounts of nourishment to grow big and thick. The giant tree that had the sturdiness to simply repel whatever monster charged it had been reduced to this state in an instant. This was proof, more than anything else, that the physical strength of the Ursus Lord far exceeded that of any other monster that had come to this village so far. You goddamned monster. You could say it's just as powerful as we imagined it would be, but still, how dreadful it truly is. This isn't the time to be impressed. What are we going to do? What can we do that results in the fewest number of victims? From just a single blow, those who had lost the will to fight grumbled. That was also unavoidable, after all, when witnessing firsthand a single blow that they themselves couldn't possibly match, or even just being grazed, resulted in death. Since a short while ago the Ursus Lord had been attacking the same elf tree, as if it had lost its mind. It was far too abnormal a behavior, but it didn't feel like it had lost control and gone mad because of magic. It was a kind of movement that made you think it held some kind of special grudge against elf trees. And sometimes it would pause and take a quick glance at Agnia and the other dark elves before starting to attack the tree once more. It doesn't feel like this it's teaching a cub how to acquire food, does it? There weren't any signs of a cub anywhere around the Ursus Lord. Agnia glanced at the quiver hanging from his waist and the arrows inside it. Did some dark elf attack it just to mess with it? Is that why it holds a grudge against elf trees? The dark elves were the only ones who thought the elf tree itself didn't have any scent, but it wasn't necessarily true that monsters with an excellent sense of smell, like the Ankylosaurus, didn't notice it. But if that were the case, then if they abandoned this village, they might be safe for the time being. No, I can't imagine things going that well. It would get hungry after it spends a certain amount of time raging, and it might come after us by tracking our scents. We should give it the honey-coated meat and pray that's enough to satisfy it, after all. But what worries me is that it sometimes peeks over at us, as if it seems to be observing us. The Ursus Lord really was throwing the occasional flickering glance towards them after all, and it attacked the elf tree each time it did. Could it be that its objective is to keep us pinned down here? So a different specimen is following it to the village from another direction. Would it even need to do that kind of thing? An Ursus Lord? It would be if its goal is to drive us out of the village, wouldn't it? Maybe there's another Ursus waiting to ambush us at the place we escaped to, or something. I've never heard of Ursi hunting together, but if that's not what it is, then it doesn't make any sense, huh? Then we don't have any other choice but for everyone to flee in every direction. And if each person takes meat or some other food along with them, it'll probably quiet down while it's eating the food then. Is that really our only choice? Don't give me that look. It's not as if we're abandoning the village. It'll be fine for us to come back once the Ursus is gone. There were those who were being comforted, but they couldn't imagine things going that well. That was because of the crunching sounds the Ursus Lord was making as it whittled away at the elf tree. Couldn't it be wanting to make this a part of his territory? If that was the case, then there was no other way than for Agnia and the other dark elves to leave everything behind and abandon the village. Through the effects of magic, the growth of an elf tree was unbelievably fast. But even though it had grown this big so far, it couldn't be accomplished overnight. To the dark elves who lived together with the elf trees, losing one was the same as having everything stolen from them. How many sacrifices would they have to make if they weren't allowed to sponge off the other villages until they could once more raise a big elf tree? Okay. Let's leave the village while giving the honey-smeared meat to the Ursus. Everyone nodded in agreement with the master of the hunt's words. For the time being, Sumomo and Prune will prepare the honey-smeared meat. The others will remain here and draw the attention of the Ursus Lord so that it doesn't go into the village. The two young rangers ran off towards the center of the village. The Ursus Lord, who had already torn one elf tree to pieces and moved on to the next, suddenly stopped swinging those claws. Faster than Agnia and the others could even think, what is it doing? The Ursus Lord started moving in the direction of the center of the village. Stop! Agnia immediately drew 2 arrows from his quiver and knocked them. At the edge of his vision, he saw that his friends were holding their bows, ready to fire. He simultaneously activated a skill and fired the 2 arrows. Both arrows hit the Ursus Lord's huge body, and both were repelled. The next moment, many arrows were flying toward it.